Sweat prickled at the back of her neck as her cruel, fat-shaming ex-fiancé smirked, walking straight toward her across the ballroom. Desperate, she grabbed the arm of a tall, imposing stranger in a bespoke suit. "Please, just dance with me. My ex is here," she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't pull away. Instead, a dark, dangerous smile curved his lips as his hand slid to her waist. She thought she was saving herself from humiliation. She had no idea she had just claimed a dance with the city's most ruthless Mafia boss. Music drifted through the opulent grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in Manhattan, a slow, melodic jazz piece that felt entirely out of sync with the chaotic drumbeat inside Meline Hayes' chest. Crystal chandeliers cast a fractured golden glow over the sea of socialites, hedge fund managers, and politicians, illuminating a world where Meline categorically did not belong. She stood near a towering column wrapped in white roses, clutching a crystal flute of Veuve Clicquot so tightly her knuckles had turned bone white. Tonight was the annual New York Children's Foundation Gala. As a senior event coordinator for the catering company, Meline was strictly supposed to be behind the scenes, barking orders into a headset. But a last-minute cancellation by a major donor meant her boss had shoved a ticket into her hand, ordering her to mingle and fill the empty seat. She had spent a small fortune, 3 months of her savings, on a deep emerald green gown. It was a beautiful dress, crafted with a sweetheart neckline and a ruched bodice designed to flatter her full, plus-size figure. Meline was fat. She carried her weight in her broad hips, thick thighs, and a soft, rounded stomach. For a brief, fleeting moment in her tiny Brooklyn apartment mirror, she had felt undeniably gorgeous. The rich velvet cascaded over her curves, and the color made her hazel eyes pop. But standing in this room, full of razor-thin heiresses and size 0 models, all that hard-won confidence evaporated into the air-conditioned chill. She took a nervous sip of the dry champagne, her eyes scanning the crowded dance floor. That was when her gaze locked onto a familiar, devastating profile. Bradley Jenkins. The air vanished from Medeline's lungs. Her stomach plummeted past the marble floors and into the earth. Bradley was standing by the ice sculpture, looking as smug and polished as ever in his navy tuxedo. Clinging to his arm like a decorative vine was a woman so incredibly thin and angular she looked as though she might snap in a strong breeze. Memories rushed back, suffocating and sharp. It had been 14 months since Bradley had called off their wedding. 14 months since he had sat her down in their shared living room, looked at her with an expression of profound pity, and said the words that still haunted her nightmares. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I really tried, but I can't marry someone who doesn't respect their body. I told you to lose 50 pounds for the wedding photos. You didn't even try. I can't look at you anymore without feeling embarrassed." He had shattered her world. 7 years of loyalty, love, and shared dreams, tossed aside because her waist wasn't narrow enough to stroke his fragile, superficial ego. The heartbreak had sent Meline into a spiral of depression that had taken her over a year, hundreds of hours of therapy, and immense willpower to finally crawl out of. And now here he was, the man who had broken her. Meline tried to shrink behind the floral column, praying to any deity listening that he wouldn't turn his head. She calculated the distance to the heavy mahogany exit doors, 50 yards. If she walked quickly, she could make it to the coat check, hail a cab on 5th Avenue, and be back in her safe, quiet apartment before the panic attack fully set in. She took one step to the left. Bradley turned. His eyes scanned the perimeter of the room. And then, inevitably, they snagged on her. Madeline froze like a deer caught in headlights. She watched his expression shift from casual boredom to sudden recognition, and then, agonizingly, to a mocking, triumphant smirk. He leaned down, whispering something into the ear of the statuesque blonde on his arm. The woman looked over at Madeline, her gaze raking up and down the emerald gown, before a cruel, glittering laugh erupted from her glossed lips. They were laughing at her. Panic, hot and blinding, clawed at Madeline's throat. Bradley patted the blonde's hand and began walking directly across the ballroom, his eyes locked onto Madeline. He was coming over to gloat. He was coming to look at her full figure, to introduce his perfect, thin, new girlfriend, and to remind Madeline of exactly why she wasn't good enough for him. No, Madeline thought, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Please, God, no. She couldn't let him see her standing alone in a corner, clutching a drink like a pathetic, discarded afterthought. She needed an escape. She needed a shield. Blindly, Madeline turned her head, searching the immediate vicinity for an out. Standing barely 2 feet away from her was a man. He had his back partially turned, gazing out the towering window at the glittering New York skyline. Madeline didn't have time to analyze him. She didn't have time to notice the absolute stillness of his posture, or the way the space around him seemed eerily empty, as if the other guests instinctively knew to keep their distance. She didn't notice the heavy, oppressive aura of danger radiating from his broad shoulders. All she saw was a tall man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit. Bradley was 10 yards away. 5 yards. Acting entirely on a desperate, feral instinct, Madeline closed the distance between herself and the stranger. She reached out, her trembling fingers wrapping around his thick, muscular forearm. The man stiffened instantly. His head snapped toward her, dark eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, terrifying intensity. "Please," Madeline gasped out, her voice a fragile, broken whisper. She stepped closer, invading his personal space, terrified he would shove her away. "Please, just dance with me. My ex is here." Gabriel Navarro did not like to be touched. In fact, in the dark, blood-soaked underworld of the East Coast syndicates, touching the head of the Navarro family without permission was an offense typically punishable by a broken wrist, or worse. Gabriel had attended this insufferable charity gala for one reason: to finalize a lucrative waterfront zoning permit with a corrupt city comptroller who was currently sweating profusely on the other side of the room. Gabriel was bored. He was irritated by the terrible acoustics, the watered-down liquor, and the pathetic, sycophantic elite buzzing around him like flies. He had been staring out the window, calculating how quickly he could leave without drawing federal attention, when a soft, warm hand suddenly clamped onto his forearm. Every instinct honed over 20 years of brutal survival flared to life. His muscles locked into granite. Less than 10 feet away, concealed in the shadows of the velvet drapery, his 3 personal security guards instantly reached beneath their tuxedo jackets, their eyes burning with lethal intent. Gabriel turned his head, fully prepared to terrify whoever had been stupid enough to grab him. Instead of an assassin or a desperate politician, he found himself looking down into a pair of wide, terrified hazel eyes. She was trembling. A plus-size woman in a lush emerald gown that clung beautifully to every soft, generous curve of her body. Her dark hair was styled in soft waves that framed a flushed, panic-stricken face. She smelled like vanilla and pure, unfiltered anxiety. Please, just dance with me. My ex is here." The plea was a frantic, breathless rush of words. Gabriel's dark, piercing gaze shifted over her head. Over the crowd, he spotted exactly who she was running from. A smug, average-looking man in a cheap, off-the-rack navy tuxedo, smirking as he marched toward them, with a rail-thin woman draped over him. The malice in the approaching man's eyes was obvious. It was the look of a pathetic bully seeking an easy victim. Gabriel looked back down at the woman clinging to his arm. She was bracing herself, her eyes squeezed shut for a fraction of a second, entirely expecting Gabriel to peel her hand off and leave her to the wolves. Gabriel Navarro was a ruthless man. He was a monster in the dark, a kingpin who dismantled empires and shattered bones without a second thought. But he also possessed a possessive, predatory instinct that flared up at the strangest moments. Looking at the soft, gorgeous woman trembling against his side and the arrogant fool marching over to humiliate her, a dark amusement sparked in Gabriel's chest. He raised his free hand. With a subtle, almost invisible flick of his fingers, he signaled his guards to stand down. "You want to dance?" Gabriel's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate straight through the floorboards and into Madeline's bones. Before Madeline could nod, Gabriel shifted. His large, warm hand slid around to her back, settling firmly against the deep curve of her waist. He didn't hesitate. He didn't fumble. He pulled her flush against his hard, imposing frame with a fluid, terrifying grace, stepping directly into the flow of the couples on the dance floor. Madeline gasped as her chest collided with his solid chest. The fabric of his Tom Ford suit was incredibly soft, but the body beneath it felt like carved marble. "Follow my lead," Gabriel murmured, his lips brushing dangerously close to her ear. They began to move. Gabriel was a surprisingly flawless dancer, guiding her backward with an authoritative, dominant control that left Madeline completely breathless. She scrambled to keep up, her hands fluttering up to rest cautiously against his broad shoulders. "He's watching us," Gabriel noted casually, his dark, dangerous eyes scanning the edge of the floor. Madeline's face burned hot. She risked a tiny glance over Gabriel's bicep. Bradley had stopped dead in his tracks at the edge of the dance floor. The smug, victorious smirk had been entirely wiped from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He was staring at Madeline, and then staring at the towering, devastatingly handsome, terrifyingly commanding man holding her. "Is he the one who made you look like you were walking to the gallows?" Gabriel asked, his hand tightening slightly on her waist, pulling her even closer. The friction of her full, curved body pressing against his lean, muscular one sent an unexpected spike of heat straight to Gabriel's groin. He hadn't expected her to feel so incredibly good in his arms. So soft, so perfectly grounded. "Yes," Madeline whispered, her voice shaking. "We were engaged. He left me. He told me I was too fat for him to love." The words slipped out before she could stop them, a vulnerable, bleeding truth she had never spoken aloud to a stranger. She immediately squeezed her eyes shut, mortified. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. You don't even know me. I'm just using you, and—" "Look at me," Gabriel interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a sharp edge of command that demanded absolute obedience. Madeline's eyes fluttered open. She stared up into his face. Up close, he was devastating. Sharp jawline, thick dark hair slightly tousled, and eyes as black as obsidian. "The man staring at us is a blind, pathetic fool," Gabriel stated, his gaze dropping to her full, parted lips before rising back to her eyes. "And you are the most beautiful, captivating woman in this entire ballroom. If he was too stupid to realize what he had, his loss is my absolute victory. Do you understand?" Madeline's heart performed a violent somersault. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that. Nobody had ever looked at her with such raw, undisguised hunger. "What is your name?" she managed to ask. "Gabriel," he replied smoothly. He didn't give his last name. Doing so usually sent civilians running for the hills, and Gabriel found, much to his own dark surprise, that he did not want Madeline to run away. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. "I'm Madeline," she breathed. "Madeline." He tested the name on his tongue, liking the taste of it. Gabriel spun her gracefully, bringing her back so her back was now facing Bradley, blocking the X from her view. Gabriel stared directly over Madeline's shoulder, locking eyes with Bradley Jenkins. Gabriel's expression shifted. The polite, handsome mask melted away, revealing the cold, dead-eyed glare of an apex predator. He stared at Bradley with such murderous, chilling intensity that Bradley physically flinched, taking a rapid step backward, suddenly looking pale and deeply afraid. Gabriel smiled softly, dipping his head down to brush his lips against the soft skin of Madeline's neck, relishing the way she shivered in his arms. The trap had been set, and Madeline had just walked right into the center of his web. Music faded as the jazz band concluded their set, replaced by a polite smattering of applause echoing off the gold-leaf ceiling of the St. Regis ballroom. Gabriel's hand lingered on Madeline's waist for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, before slowly falling to his side. The loss of his body heat sent an immediate, involuntary shiver down her spine. For the length of one song, she had felt entirely invincible, wrapped up in the arms of a man who looked like a dark god and moved like a warrior. Now, reality was violently crashing back into her periphery. "Thank you," Madeline whispered, her chest heaving as she took a necessary step back. Her hazel eyes darted nervously over his shoulder, checking the perimeter. Bradley was nowhere to be seen, likely having retreated to the open bar to nurse his wounded pride. I really appreciate what you just did. You completely saved me." Gabriel tilted his head, his dark, impenetrable eyes studying the flush on her cheeks. "I didn't save you, Madeline. I simply took advantage of an opportunity. I rarely turn down a dance with a gorgeous woman." His compliment was so casual, so completely devoid of the usual pitying hesitation people used when speaking to her, that Madeline felt a lump form in her throat. She needed a moment to breathe, to collect the fractured pieces of her composure before she started crying in the middle of a high society charity gala. "I need to powder my nose," she managed to say, offering a shaky, polite smile. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Gabriel." Before he could object, Madeline turned and practically fled toward the grand arched doorway leading to the lobby restrooms. She navigated through the sea of silk and diamonds, keeping her head down, praying she wouldn't bump into anyone. She finally burst into the quiet, marble-lined corridor that housed the powder rooms, leaning heavily against the cool, damask-covered wall. Pressing a hand to her chest, she took a long, deep breath. She had survived. She had looked Bradley in the eye, and instead of crumbling into a pathetic puddle of tears, she had danced with the most handsome man in the room. Well, well, look who decided to finally crawl out of her pathetic little cave. Madeline's blood turned to ice. She whipped around. Bradley stepped out of the shadow of a large marble pillar, swirling a glass of amber scotch in his hand. His perfectly styled hair was slightly ruffled, and his jaw was locked in a tight, angry line. Without the rail-thin blonde clinging to him, he looked surprisingly small, but the malice radiating from his eyes was as sharp as ever. "Bradley," Madeline said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her hands were visibly shaking. "Leave me alone. I'm not doing this with you." "Doing what?" Bradley sneered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Having a conversation? You can't even look at me, Maddie. You're pathetic. I honestly couldn't believe it was you in that dress. Still carrying all that extra weight, I see. Did you really think squeezing yourself into a designer gown would hide the fact that you're fat? You look like a stuffed sausage." The words hit her like physical blows, targeting the deepest, most tender insecurities she had spent 14 months trying to heal. Madeline shrank back against the wall, her eyes filling with hot, stinging tears. "Stop it. Just leave me alone." "Who was the guy?" Bradley demanded, his tone turning vicious. He stepped closer, invading her space, trapping her against the damask wall. "Did you hire an escort for the night? Is that how sad your life has gotten? Paying some rent-a-tux to spin you around so you don't look like a completely unlovable loser? Because let's be honest, Maddie, no guy who looks like that is going to touch someone who looks like you for free." A tear spilled over Madeline's lashes, tracking hotly down her cheek. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but before she could utter a single syllable, the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Remove your presence from her airspace." The voice was low, terrifyingly calm, and layered with an unspoken promise of extreme violence. Bradley jumped, spinning around. Gabriel stood at the entrance of the corridor. He wasn't rushing. He simply stood there, his hands casually resting in the pockets of his Tom Ford trousers, looking at Bradley with the detached, clinical interest of a man inspecting a cockroach before crushing it. "Hey, pal, this is a private conversation." Bradley puffed out his chest, attempting to look imposing. "Back off. You already got your paycheck for the night." Gabriel didn't blink. He took a slow, predatory step forward, then another. With every step, the sheer, crushing weight of his dominance seemed to fill the corridor. Bradley's false bravado faltered. He took a step back, suddenly realizing he was standing in a confined space with a man who was significantly taller, broader, and infinitely more dangerous. Gabriel stopped less than a foot away from Bradley. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "I am going to give you exactly 5 seconds to turn around, walk out the front doors of this hotel, and never look in this woman's direction again," Gabriel said softly. "If you speak to her again, if you so much as breathe in her general direction, I will personally ensure that your existence is systematically dismantled. Do you comprehend what I am telling you, little man?" Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the heavy gold Cartier watch on Gabriel's wrist, and then up to the dead, soulless black eyes glaring down at him. Bradley wasn't a brave man. He was a corporate bully who preyed on kindness. Confronted with genuine, lethal alpha energy, he completely folded. "Sure, whatever, she's crazy anyway," Bradley stammered, dropping his gaze. He sidestepped Gabriel, practically pressing his back against the opposite wall to avoid touching the larger man, and scurried down the hallway like a frightened rat. Gabriel watched him leave, his jaw tight. When Bradley was out of sight, Gabriel turned his attention to Madeline. She was pressing her hands over her face, quietly sobbing, entirely overwhelmed by the cruelty of the past 5 minutes. Gabriel stepped forward. The terrifying, murderous aura vanished, replaced by a gentle, steady hita. He reached out, his large hands gently wrapping around her wrists, pulling them away from her tear-stained face. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Madeline sniffled, lifting her watery hazel eyes to meet his. "You are crying over a piece of trash that isn't worthy of wiping the dirt from your shoes," Gabriel murmured, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a pristine, monogrammed silk handkerchief. He gently dabbed the tears from her cheeks. "He is a weak, pathetic fool who fears your presence because you are far too much woman for him to handle. You are full and soft and magnificent. Never let a man like that make you feel small again." Madeline stared at him, completely paralyzed by the rough, raw sincerity in his voice. Why are you being so nice to me?" Gabriel's lips curved into a dark, devastating smile. "Because I know value when I see it, Madeline, and I think this party has entirely lost its appeal. Let's get out of here." Stepping out of the stifling, glittering atmosphere of the St. Regis and into the crisp, cool autumn air of Manhattan was like waking up from a fever dream. Madeline shivered, crossing her arms over the bodice of her emerald gown. Instantly, a heavy, incredibly warm suit jacket was draped over her shoulders. The scent of bergamot, expensive tobacco, and pure masculinity enveloped her. She looked up at Gabriel, who was signaling down the street with a sharp jerk of his chin. Within seconds, a massive, sleek black Maybach glided to a halt against the curb, completely ignoring the valet zone. A formidable man in a sharp suit immediately stepped out of the driver's seat, pulling open the heavy rear door and nodding respectfully to Gabriel. "After you," Gabriel said, placing a firm, guiding hand on the small of her back. Madeline hesitated for a fraction of a second. She was a practical, cautious Brooklyn woman. Getting into a tinted luxury vehicle with a strange man she had met less than 30 minutes ago was the pinnacle of reckless behavior. But looking into Gabriel's eyes, she saw no deception. She saw a fierce, possessive shelter. Taking a deep breath, she slid into the cavernous, leather-scented interior of the Maybach. Gabriel slid in beside her, filling the space with his commanding presence. "Take us to the private lounge at the Baccarat, Thomas," Gabriel instructed the driver. The privacy partition smoothly slid up, sealing them off from the front. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as the Maybach merged into the midnight traffic on Fifth Avenue. Madeline clutched the lapels of Gabriel's jacket, suddenly hyper-aware of the intimate, quiet darkness of the car. "I feel like Cinderella, only significantly heavier, and without the glass slippers," Madeline joked softly, attempting to break the heavy tension radiating between them. Gabriel turned his head, his eyes locking onto hers. He didn't laugh. Instead, his gaze slowly traveled down from her face, lingering on the generous swell of her cleavage pushed up by the velvet gown, down to the soft, wide curve of her hips resting against the plush leather seat. "Do not insult yourself in my presence," Gabriel stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a flush of heat straight to Madeline's core. "I have zero interest in walking skeletons. I like a woman who feels real, a woman I can actually hold. You carry yourself like an apology, Madeline. Stop apologizing for taking up space. Your body is a masterpiece." Madeline's breath hitched. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Nobody had ever celebrated her size. Society, her mother, Bradley. They had all treated her weight as a flaw to be fixed, a problem to be solved. Gabriel looked at her like she was the most decadent, desirable prize he had ever laid eyes on. Within minutes, the car pulled up to a discreet side entrance of a towering luxury building. Gabriel led her inside, bypassing the main public areas and stepping into a private gold-lined elevator that required a specific thumbprint scan to operate. Madeline watched, wide-eyed, as the doors slid shut. "Who exactly are you, Gabriel?" she finally asked, her curiosity overriding her manners. "You terrify people just by looking at them. You have a private driver who looks like a bodyguard, and you have biometric access to VIP elevators. You aren't just a businessman, are you?" Gabriel looked down at her, a slow, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "I deal in logistics, import, export, real estate, sometimes conflict resolution." It was a perfectly rehearsed, vague answer. Before Madeline could press further, the elevator chimed, opening into an incredibly exclusive, dimly lit lounge filled with red velvet booths, baccarat crystal chandeliers, and an atmosphere of absolute, intimidating wealth. There were only a few other patrons scattered around the room, speaking in hushed, serious tones. Gabriel guided her to a secluded corner booth, sliding into the circular velvet seating right beside her, rather than across from her. Their thighs brushed. Madeline's pulse skyrocketed at the casual, dominant proximity. A waiter immediately appeared, placing a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir and 2 crystal glasses on the table without needing to be asked. He poured the wine in silence, bowed slightly, and vanished. "Drink," Gabriel urged gently, picking up his glass. "It will help settle your nerves." Madeline took a sip. The wine was rich, complex, and unbelievably smooth. She let out a long sigh, feeling the tension finally begin to melt out of her shoulders. She turned to Gabriel, resting her elbow on the table. "Thank you. For the rescue, for the jacket, for the wine. You've been incredibly kind to a complete stranger." "You aren't a stranger anymore," Gabriel replied, his gaze dropping to her lips. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was shockingly tender for a man who looked so hard. "Tell me about Madeline. What does she do when she isn't fleeing from pathetic ex-fiancés?" For the next hour, Madeline found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, talking freely. She told him about her job organizing events, her tiny apartment in Brooklyn, her love for baking, and her secret dream of opening her own catering business. Gabriel listened with absolute, undivided attention. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his phone. He simply absorbed her words, his dark eyes locked onto her face, making her feel like she was the most fascinating creature on earth. She was mid-laugh, explaining a disastrous cake-tasting event, when the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. A man had approached their table. He was heavily tattooed, wearing a cheap leather jacket that loudly clashed with the elegant surroundings. He looked nervous, sweating profusely, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mr. Navarro," the man rasped, his voice trembling violently. "I didn't know you were going to be here tonight. I swear I have the envelope. I just need 2 more days. The shipment got delayed at the docks." Madeline froze, her laughter dying in her throat. She looked from the terrified man to Gabriel. The warmth entirely vanished from Gabriel's face. His jaw locked into a sharp, unforgiving line, and the temperature in the booth instantly plummeted to sub-zero. He slowly set his crystal wine glass down on the table. "You are interrupting my private evening, Marco," Gabriel said softly. It was the exact same tone he had used on Bradley, but this time it carried a horrifyingly real undertone of lethal consequence. "And you know how much I despise being interrupted." "Please, boss," Marco pleaded, dropping entirely to his knees, right there in the middle of the luxury lounge, clasping his hands together. "Don't send the crew. I have a wife. 2 more days. I swear on my life." Madeline's blood ran cold. "Boss, the crew. I swear on my life." She slowly turned her head to look at the man sitting beside her, the man who had held her with such gentle care, the man who had wiped her tears. Gabriel didn't look at the kneeling man. He slowly turned his head, locking his dark, bottomless eyes with Madeline's terrified hazel ones. The truth hung heavily in the air between them, an undeniable, suffocating reality. She hadn't just danced with a wealthy stranger. She had thrown herself into the arms of a mob boss. Madeline felt the oxygen instantly evaporate from the dimly lit lounge. Her heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs, loud enough that she was certain Gabriel could hear it. She stared at the man kneeling on the floor, weeping and begging for his life, and then slowly shifted her gaze back to the devastatingly handsome man sitting beside her. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together. The absolute stillness, the heavy, suffocating aura of danger, the armed driver, the biometric elevator. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman with a knack for conflict resolution. He was a kingpin. Gabriel's dark, fathomless eyes remained locked on Madeline. He didn't even grant the groveling man a secondary glance. "You have 48 hours, Marco," Gabriel stated, his voice devoid of any human warmth. It was a cold, mechanical decree that sent a violent shiver down Madeline's spine. "If the shipment is not in my warehouse by Friday midnight, you will not have to worry about providing for your wife anymore, because neither of you will be found. Now remove yourself from my presence before I lose my patience." Marco scrambled backward on his hands and knees, murmuring frantic strings of gratitude before practically sprinting toward the elevator. Silence descended upon the velvet booth, heavy and suffocating. Madeline looked at the half-empty glass of vintage Pinot Noir in front of her, suddenly feeling incredibly nauseous. The luxurious, romantic fantasy had been brutally ripped away, exposing the terrifying, blood-soaked reality underneath. "You're the head of the Navarro syndicate," Madeline whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the lounge's ambient jazz. She had seen the name in the gritty city tabloids, usually associated with federal indictments, seized cargo ships, and bodies pulled from the East River. "You're a criminal." "I am a man who controls his environment," Gabriel corrected smoothly, though the dangerous, predatory edge remained in his tone. He shifted closer to her, the heat of his large frame wrapping around her shivering body. "And right now, you are trembling. There is no reason for you to fear me, Madeline. I do not hurt innocent things." "You just threatened to murder a man and his wife," she gasped, pushing herself back against the velvet cushions, trying to put distance between them. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I threatened a thief who stole $1 million in untraceable merchandise from my docks. My world operates on absolute consequences, but my world has absolutely nothing to do with you. Tonight, I am simply Gabriel, and you are the stunning, captivating woman who asked me to dance." "No," Madeline said, shaking her head frantically. She grabbed her small clutch from the table, her knuckles white. "No, I can't do this. I'm just a catering coordinator from Brooklyn. I bake cupcakes and organize floral arrangements. I don't belong in a Mafia movie. I need to go home." She slid out of the booth, her legs feeling like lead, and practically ran toward the private elevator. She mashed the call button with a trembling finger, praying the doors would open quickly. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed behind her. Gabriel didn't run, but his long strides closed the distance effortlessly. Before she could press the button a second time, a large, warm hand flattened against the brass panel, completely boxing her in. "Do not run from me," Gabriel commanded, his voice a low, vibrating rumble right next to her ear. Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, terrified he was going to hurt her. But instead of violence, She felt his other hand slide gently around her thick waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He buried his face in the soft curve of her neck, inhaling deeply, entirely ignoring her resistance. "Why are you doing this?" she cried out, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "Why me? Look at me. You could have any supermodel in this city. You could have women who are thin and perfect and wealthy. I am fat. I am broken. My own fiancé couldn't even look at me without feeling disgusted. What could a ruthless mafia boss possibly want with a plus-size caterer?" Gabriel spun her around with shocking speed, his hands gripping her shoulders. His eyes were blazing with a dark, furious fire that literally took her breath away. "Never repeat the words of a weak, insecure coward in my presence again," Gabriel growled, his face inches from hers. "Bradley is a pathetic boy who was intimidated by your substance. I am a man. I crave warmth. I crave softness. I look at your curves, at your beautiful full body, and all I want to do is worship every single inch of you until you forget his miserable name." Madeline's breath hitched. Tears spilled over her lashes, hot and unbidden. She had spent over a year starving herself, punishing herself, hating the flesh on her bones because of one man's cruel rejection. Now, the most terrifying, powerful man she had ever met was looking at her like she was a goddess. "You are genuine," Gabriel continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He reached up, his thumbs gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. "In a world full of plastic, fake, deceitful people who only want my money or my blood, you grabbed my arm because you were scared, not because of who I am. You are real, Madeline, and I am not going to let you walk out of my life just because my profession frightens you." The elevator doors chimed and slid open. Gabriel stepped back, offering her a clear path. "I will have Thomas drive you home," Gabriel said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I will not force you to stay. But know this, Madeline, I am going to pursue you. I am going to tear down every wall that idiot built inside your head. You are mine now. You just don't fully realize it yet." Madeline stepped into the elevator, her heart pounding a chaotic rhythm. As the brass doors slid shut, sealing Gabriel away, she realized with a terrifying jolt that a dark, twisted part of her didn't want to run away at all. Morning sunlight filtered harshly through the cheap plastic blinds of the catering company's cramped Brooklyn office. Madeline sat at her desk, staring blankly at a spreadsheet detailing napkin orders for a corporate retreat. Her mind was entirely consumed by the events of the previous night. She kept touching her neck, phantom shivers racing down her spine where Gabriel's lips had brushed against her skin. She had tried to convince herself it was a fever dream, that the dark, dangerous mafia boss with the obsidian eyes was just a hallucination brought on by the trauma of seeing Bradley. But the massive, terrifyingly expensive black Maybach that had idled outside her tiny apartment building until she was safely locked inside had proven otherwise. "Madeline, have you completely lost your mind?" The shrill, demanding voice of her boss, Cynthia, snapped Madeline back to reality. Cynthia stormed out of her private office, her reading glasses perched precariously on the edge of her nose. "What is going on out front?" Cynthia demanded, waving a clipboard frantically. "There are 3 men in Italian suits carrying what looks like an entire botanical garden into my lobby, and they refuse to speak to anyone but you." Madeline's stomach plummeted. She pushed back her chair and hurried past her boss, practically sprinting into the front reception area. She stopped dead in her tracks, The modest, linoleum-floored lobby had been entirely transformed. Over a dozen massive arrangements of deep, blood-red baccarat roses were perfectly positioned around the room, filling the air with a heavy, intoxicating perfume. Standing in the center of the floral explosion was Thomas, the formidable driver from the night before, looking wildly out of place in his tailored tactical suit. "Miss Hayes," Thomas said respectfully, giving a slight formal bow. He held out a small black velvet box. "From Mr. Navarro. He insisted these be delivered personally to ensure your day started beautifully." Madeline felt the eyes of every single receptionist and junior planner burning into her back. Her face flushed a deep crimson. She slowly walked forward, and took the velvet box from Thomas's massive hand. Inside, resting on a bed of white silk, was a breathtaking diamond and emerald pendant that perfectly matched the color of the dress she had worn the night before. Tucked beneath it was a heavy cardstock note written in sharp, elegant handwriting. "Your beauty deserves to be adorned, not hidden. Wear this, and remember whose protection you fall under. G." "You can't accept this, Maddie," a voice suddenly sneered from the doorway. Madeline jumped, snapping the box shut. Bradley strode into the reception area, looking smug and infuriatingly confident in a grey business suit. He completely ignored the towering wall of muscle that was Thomas, focusing all his cruel attention on Madeline. "What are you doing here, Bradley?" Madeline demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and sudden intense anger. "I came to do your boss a favor," Bradley said loudly, ensuring everyone in the office could hear. He turned to Cynthia, who was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "I strongly suggest you fire her immediately, Cynthia. Last night, at the St. Regis Gala, Madeline was acting completely unhinged. She harassed high-profile donors, caused a massive scene, and completely embarrassed your company's reputation. If she stays on your payroll, my firm will pull all our future catering contracts." Madeline gasped. It was a blatant, malicious lie. Bradley was actively trying to destroy her career simply because his fragile ego couldn't handle the fact that another man had stepped in to defend her. Cynthia looked entirely panicked, her eyes darting between Bradley and the lucrative contracts he represented. "Maddie," Cynthia started, wringing her hands anxiously. "If what he's saying is true, I have to protect the business." "It's a lie," Madeline cried out, stepping forward. "He's making it up because he is a fragile, insecure little boy, attempting to exert power he does not possess." The low, deadly voice instantly silenced the entire room. Gabriel Navarro stepped through the glass doors of the office. He was dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit that screamed lethal elegance. The air in the room instantly grew heavy, thick with the terrifying, suffocating dominance he effortlessly commanded. He didn't look at Cynthia. He didn't look at the junior planners. He locked eyes solely with Bradley. Bradley visibly paled, taking a rapid, stumbling step backward until his back hit the reception desk. The cocky arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by genuine, trembling terror as he recognized the man from the corridor. Gabriel walked slowly across the linoleum floor, stopping beside Madeline. He reached out, his large hand gently resting on the small of her back, a clear, unmistakable claim of possession that sent a rush of heat straight to her core. "I warned you last night to remove yourself from her existence," Gabriel said to Bradley, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "You chose to ignore that warning. A very poor decision." "I didn't know you would be here," Bradley stammered, sweating profusely. "I'm just protecting my company's interests." Gabriel smiled, a cold, empty expression that promised absolute ruin. He snapped his fingers. Thomas instantly stepped forward, pulling a thick manila folder from his jacket and tossing it onto the reception desk. "Your company fired you exactly 12 minutes ago," Gabriel stated calmly. "They received a very detailed, highly documented portfolio regarding your offshore embezzlement habits. The IRS is currently executing a raid on your apartment. By noon, your bank accounts will be frozen. By tomorrow, you will likely be in federal custody." Bradley let out a pathetic, strangled gasp. His knees buckling slightly, Gabriel turned his attention to Cynthia, who looked like she might faint. "And as for this catering company, you no longer have to worry about losing contracts. My holding corporation finalized the purchase of this entire building and the business an hour ago. Madeline is no longer your employee. She is your executive director. If anyone ever speaks to her with disrespect again, they will answer directly to me." Madeline stood entirely frozen, her mind spinning wildly out of control. She looked up at the dark, terrifying kingpin, who was rewriting the entire fabric of her reality. Gabriel looked down at her, his expression softening into something raw and fiercely protective. He had completely destroyed her nightmare, and in doing so, he had locked her permanently inside his dangerous, intoxicating world. Silence dominated the linoleum-floored lobby, broken only by the ragged, panicked breathing of Bradley Jenkins. He stared at the thick manila folder resting on the reception desk as if it were a live explosive. Without uttering another word, his face completely drained of color, Bradley scrambled backward, turned on his heel, and bolted out the glass doors. He fled into the bustling Brooklyn street like the terrified coward he truly was. His corporate life completely reduced to ashes. Madeline stood absolutely paralyzed. Her mind scrambled to process the monumental shift in her reality. She slowly turned her wide hazel eyes toward Cynthia, entirely expecting her former boss to scream or immediately dial the authorities. Instead, Cynthia nervously adjusted her reading glasses, gave Gabriel a stiff, deeply respectful nod, and quietly retreated into her private office, shutting the heavy wooden door behind her. "Gabriel," Madeline finally breathed, her voice trembling under the weight of the moment. "What did you just do?" "I removed an obstacle," Gabriel replied smoothly, his tone remarkably calm for a man who had just dismantled someone's entire existence. He reached out, his thumb gently grazing her jawline. "And I ensured that your incredible talent will never again be exploited by a mediocre, unappreciative management structure. You are the boss now, Madeline." He gently but firmly placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her out of the suffocating office and into the crisp morning air. The sleek black Maybach was idling at the curb. Thomas opened the rear door, his expression unreadable, though he offered Madeline a polite nod. Once they were safely sealed inside the luxurious, soundproof cabin, the heavy privacy partition smoothly slid up. Madeline leaned back against the plush leather, her hands trembling as she touched the velvet box resting in her lap. "You bought a building. You bought a whole company. Just to prove a point." "I bought an empire for my queen," Gabriel corrected, his dark, obsidian eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, unwavering intensity. He shifted closer, entirely eliminating the space between them. The scent of bergamot and dark tobacco wrapped around her senses. "I told you last night, Madeline. I am a man who controls his environment. When I see something of immense, undeniable value, I secure it. And you are the most valuable thing I have ever encountered." Madeline's breath hitched. "But my life, I'm just a normal person. I bake, I plan parties, I have stretch marks and soft thighs. I don't belong in a world of cartels and millions of dollars. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He reached out, taking the velvet box from her lap and tossing it carelessly onto the opposite seat. He didn't care about the diamonds. He cared about the woman. He gripped her hips, effortlessly lifting her full, curvy frame and pulling her across the seat until she was straddling his lap. Madeline gasped at the sudden, dominating movement, her hands instinctively flying to his broad shoulders to steady herself. "Listen to me carefully, because I am only going to say this once," Gabriel growled softly, his hands tracing the generous curve of her hips, gripping her thick thighs with a possessive heat that sent fireworks straight to her core. He outlined his absolute vows to her. Absolute protection. No one on this earth will ever speak down to you again. If they try, they will cease to exist. Unwavering worship. I do not want a woman made of plastic and starving bones. I want your softness. I want your weight pressing against me. I want every single inch of this gorgeous, perfect body. Total freedom. You will run your company exactly how you see fit. My resources are yours. My empire is yours. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes, but this time, they were not tears of humiliation or heartbreak. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. For 14 months, she had carried the heavy, suffocating burden of Bradley's toxic words. She had looked in the mirror and hated the space she occupied. But staring into the eyes of the most dangerous, powerful man in New York City, she saw nothing but pure, unadulterated adoration. "You really mean it," she whispered, her hands sliding up his chest to tangle in his thick, dark hair. "I have never spoken a false word in my life," Gabriel murmured, his gaze dropping to her parted lips. He didn't wait for permission. Gabriel captured her mouth in a searing, bruising kiss that completely obliterated the last remaining walls around Madeline's heart. He tasted like rich espresso and dark danger. Madeline moaned softly, melting against his hard chest, her full body fitting perfectly against his muscular frame, exactly like a key turning in a lock. He kissed her with a ravenous hunger, his large hands mapping the curves of her back and waist, branding her skin through her clothes, silently claiming her as his own. As the Maybach sped away from the tiny Brooklyn office and headed toward his heavily guarded, sprawling estate overlooking the Hudson River, Madeline realized her old life was officially dead. She had asked a stranger to dance to save her from a moment of embarrassment, and in return, she had been swept into a beautiful, dangerous, velvet cage. She was a curvy, soft-hearted baker, and she was now irrevocably tied to the undisputed king of the underworld. And as Gabriel pulled her even tighter against his chest, holding her like she was the center of his universe, Madeline knew she wouldn't have it any other way. Madeline's terrifying gamble paid off in the most deliciously dramatic way possible, turning her deepest insecurities into her greatest power. She went from a heartbroken catering planner to the untouchable queen of a mafia empire, proving that the right man will worship the very things the wrong man criticized. If you loved watching Gabriel utterly destroy Bradley and claim Madeline with his dark, possessive energy, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, spicy, and dramatic audio stories every week.